Franklin Roosevelt says, repetition does not transform a lie into a truth. Boy, was he wrong.
Just ask Twitter.
Jerry, you can't get up here.
Now this is the one that you said you do at the schools, right?
Yeah, and it's also the one, there's this guy in my AA group who's an analyst at the NGA, you know, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. And I showed it to him once, and he said, man, we might want to put that on over here for our people. And, you know, they have like an auditorium, one of those slope chair things that holds like 1,000 people. So, I gave him some literature on it, you know. And he gave it to his boss, and it's going through the chain of command.
I could see you going to like VFWs and doing it there too, because
Yeah, that's what I thought.
yeah.
So, you know, I tell people this is about courageous leadership, and that the first thing is a promise that I'll make, and that promise is that I'll be brief, be clear, and be gone. And that was a sign that our battalion commander, Kingston, had above his tent.
That's awesome. I
you
love
know,
it.
Which is great.
That's how I am too. Say it quick, make your point, and then be done.
And then I tell the audience that I'm responsible for anything I say, and I can back it up. You know, that they can ask questions at any time, and they don't have to wait till the end or raise their hands, just to speak out. And then I ask them to define moral courage. So can you, let's hear your definition of moral courage.
My definition of moral courage would be when you know what's right. To me, moral courage would be more about integrity, making the brave step and doing what you know is right. Even if it's not popular or what everybody is wanting you to do it right because it's the right thing to do in your soul, in your gut.
Yeah, that's a great definition. Best one I've heard. Well, that's what this is about. Now, we'll see a lot of bravery in here. But I hope the whole point of it is to talk about some moral courage leadership lessons. And that's what is really important because we get opportunities to use moral courage every day.
True, very true.
At home and with our families and, you know, everything. So I'm still continuing with things they need to know and understand. So when I talk about an infantry company, that is 3 platoons, 140 riflemen, and an infantry company is headed by a captain, and he has 4 to 5 lieutenants. And I was one of those lieutenants.
Okay.
And when I talk about an infantry platoon, which is what we'll focus on. That'll be the main thing. An infantry platoon has 40 riflemen in it, split among 4 squads. Each squad is headed by a sergeant, and then they have, like 9 or 10 guys underneath them.
Mm-hmm.
So there's 10 guys per squad, and a lieutenant heads up a platoon, and he has a total of 5 sergeants in it. He has the 4 squad leaders
Mm-hmm.
that are sergeants, and he has a platoon sergeant who, actually tells the squad leaders what to do.
Okay.
And then we continue with things they need to know. And I show them something interesting, that the average infantry combat days per year in World War II was 10 days a year. But in Vietnam, infantrymen served on the average, they were in combat 240 days a year.
Now, does that mean in actual battles?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Look at the
Wow.
difference. And then I think the last thing they need to know is the life expectancy of a good, and I really underline, I mean a good one, infantry lieutenant, infantry platoon leader in combat is, take a step.
I'm scared to even say.
Ah.
Let's say 6 months. I don't know.
Okay.
Oh my gosh.
Really, that's it.
Wow.
And that's because a really good lieutenant leads from the front.
Right.
He's always in front,
Mm-hmm.
giving commands, talking on a radio or 2 radios at once,
Mm-hmm.
and he's such an obvious target.
Right.
A bad lieutenant has a much longer.
So he would
Like
live
it.
longer
Yeah,
because
he
he's
would
in
say,
the back.
go over there and do that,
Right.
instead of leading people over there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
By example. Mhm.
yeah.
Right.
But it was real common for platoons to have 4 or 5 lieutenants, over just a 12-month period. Very common, or 6, depends on how much combat they were in. So here we talk about this plan to assault an LZ, and on this half of it is an outline of South Vietnam. And there's Way at the very top, northern end, and then Saigon, which is now called Ho Chi Minh City, down at the bottom. But there was something called the Central Highlands, meaning it was in the center of the country, and unlike the terrain down here in the Saigon, they were mountains. They were like the Appalachians or Ozarks on steroids. They were bigger than the Ozarks. So it was a very mountainous region of the country. And there were deep valleys. It had an entirely different weather system than existed in Saigon. And there weren't many civilians that lived in the Central Highlands. I would say in 1966, when this happens, there weren't any civilians outside of the town of Pleiku. There just weren't any. There were hills people,
Mm-hmm.
mountain yards,
Right.
who were like aborigines. They were short and very dark-skinned. They were very primitive.
Did they look Asian?
No, they look like aborigines, tell you the
So
truth.
they didn't have like the almond eyes?
Not really, no. They wore loincloths,
Oh wow.
men and women, and that was it. They used crossbows that they made and what do you call it? Blowguns
Yeah.
to kill food, monkeys. They were very, very primitive.
Wow.
And the Vietnamese hated the mountain yards. They looked at the mountain yards like we would look at black people.
Okay.
And the mountain yards hated all Vietnamese. They didn't care whether they were north or south. They just hated them all.
Interesting.
It is.
I didn't know any of that.
There is. The good thing about it was that, you know, in the area we operated in, which was the Central Highlands, all this area here, we didn't have to worry about shooting civilians.
Right.
You know, if there was some noise that you heard in the bush, it was either a tiger or it was a North Vietnamese enemy.
So did you see tigers over there?
I did not.
Okay.
I saw snakes.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading something recently when I was preparing this a couple of months ago that a herpetologist, is that the person who studies snakes,
Mm-hmm.
went over to Vietnam in about 1964. And he categorized, you know, the number and kinds of snakes there were in the country. And there were 39 different species of snakes, and only one of which was non-poisonous.
Oh my gosh.
Not, not my cup of tea.
No thank
Can you believe that?
Nope.
Jeez.
I don't like that at all.
Oh, no. Anyway, so this is blown up over here of this area right here, okay? We've just blown this up.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I've just taken this and I've blown
Expanded
it,
it.
expanded
Okay.
it. We had in May of '66, the Ho Chi Minh Trail ran down the border with Cambodia, you know, right down here, all the way down. And the North Vietnamese wanted to cut the country in half and bring down the South Vietnamese government. And they thought that a good way to do that would be to cut through the Central Highlands and then, you know, advance toward the coast and, you know, do it that way. And in the Central Highlands, there was this huge peak called the Chupong Massif. And massif, I think, is a French term meaning mountain. And it was 2,400 feet high. So it's not a small hill at all. And we were going to make an air assault, 2 companies, A and B, with a total of 280 men, make an air assault into LZ10 Bravo. There was another LZ just a little ways closer to the Chupong called 10 Alpha. All the LZs in this area had 10. There was Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta. And we were going to air assault into LZ10 Bravo, and then all these platoons would split up and go around and look for signs of NVA. Because we just had vague intelligence that they may be coming in there, but we didn't know where or if it was true. So we made the LZ, but unfortunately, instead of being dropped at 10 Bravo, we were dropped at the wrong LZ, 10 Alpha, right there. And as soon as we were dropped into that LZ, we found out that moment that it was the headquarters for the 66 NVA Regiment of 1,700 men.
Holy crap.
And they had, that regiment had moved in and occupied all around the Chupong Massif and this LZ. We did, when people, and it took them by surprise, because we had fired artillery preparation on LZ10 Bravo, fired all around the edges of it, and gunships had made strafing runs. That was in preparation, or prepping the LZ,
Right.
it was called, before the troops landed. So that was to kill any North Vietnamese who were lining the LZ and waiting for us.
Right, and then you landed somewhere else.
And then we landed somewhere else, just by accident. I mean, we didn't have GPS then. And every one LZ looks like another.
Right.
You know, from 2000.
So did you know that you had landed at the wrong one?
No.
Not until you got there.
But not until we were there on the ground, and we, you know, at some point, 30 minutes later, we figured out, you know, this isn't where we thought it was.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, the first clue is that when we dropped into LZ10 Alpha, there was no damage from artillery fire. There was no smoke.
Right.
It was just, you know, a park.
Oh my gosh.
You know, it looked like an untouched park. And we're going, what the hell happened
Right.
to the prep?
Right.
You know? Well, it was over here, maybe a mile away, smoking.
Wow.
And the chopper pilots, you know, the first pilot got it wrong. And the whole gaggle of choppers followed him and landed us all in this wrong LZ. Well, here's the LZ and what it looked like. And this is the first day from about 3 in the afternoon to midnight. It was an LZ about a football field. Imagine the length of a football field. Okay? That's how wide it was.
Okay.
And how long it was 2 football fields.
Okay.
Okay? So it was a pretty big space. And they had, as soon as we were dropped off and we began running toward the tree line, we saw immediately 6 big anti-aircraft guns around the LZ. Now, in May of 1966, there was more rainfall than in any other month in South Vietnam's history. So everything was flooded. Rivers were overflowing. lowlands were swamped. It was just all swampy. And the North Vietnamese gun crews had moved it a few yards into the woods because it was a little drier.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't in their foxholes that they had dug.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't prepared for us because there was no artillery preparation.
Right.
No smoke, no gunship runs, none of that.
Right.
All of a sudden, you know, like 8 choppers landed at a time and disgorged, 10 men each,
Right.
kind of thing. And there were several waves of infantrymen, another 8 coming in.
Right.
So Company A and Company B split the LZ in half, and Company B took responsibility for this half of it. And Company A had responsibility for this half of it. And that had already been prearranged. That was, we already knew that's the plan.
Mm-hmm.
But we got out and saw these positions and were receiving some rifle fire from these gun crew, 3 or 4 men per anti-aircraft gun.
Mm-hmm.
And we assaulted them and killed them right away. And as soon as we saw those guns, they were Russian 51 caliber anti-aircraft guns. Those guns weigh about 180 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
They are enormous. The barrel is like that long.
I'm assuming it's similar to the 50 cal?
Yes,
Because I love the 50 cals.
deliberately.
Yes. Okay. It's the Russian.
And the Russian version of are a little bit longer, a
Mhm.
little bit bigger
Mm.
caliber. The Russians did that so that they could fire our ammunition in their gun,
Right.
but we couldn't fire their larger cartridges
In
our
ours.
guns.
Smart.
And they always did that. We have had, for example, an 81 millimeter mortar. Theirs was 82.
Mm-hmm.
Well, anyway, the CP command post, where the company commanders, the captains were, was right here. And A Company, the first platoon, which is 40 men, had this third
Mm-hmm.
of our side of the LZ. I, in the third platoon, had this third, and the second platoon had this third right here.
Mm-hmm.
And then the same thing over with Company B. But it was so big, they weren't close to us.
No,
They were
that's a long
a
distance.
football field away.
Right.
And as soon as we captured those guns, we knew that we had landed in the headquarters of a North Vietnamese regiment, because only regiments had 51 caliber anti-aircraft guns. Smaller units like platoons and companies didn't have them.
Right.
And it's like we found commo wire, field telephone wire,
Okay.
that led from these positions up the hill, up into the Chupong Massif area.
Uh-huh.
And that's the other sign that we knew we had landed in a regimental headquarters.
Right.
because only regiments bothered to run field telephones.
Mm-hmm.
So they had a perfect setup. They would have, if they were waiting for an American company to assault this LZ, and you know, what we always did was prep the LZs, give plenty of warning.
Right.
And as soon as we would have stopped firing, they would jump into their foxholes, and they would shoot down helicopters.
Right.
Just slaughter.
Yeah, you wouldn't have even made it.
We would have never made it. They would have shot them. These guns can go up like, they have a range of like 2,500 feet, you know, like 2.5 miles.
Mm-hmm.
So they could really reach way up there,
Mm-hmm.
shoot down jet aircraft. So it would, but we took them by surprise because there was no prep.
Right.
They heard prep going on, you know, somewhere in Clayton. You know, on the other side.
Right.
It's like, you
So
know,
they're thinking they're gonna go there.
yeah, of course.
Mhm.
Yeah, you know, it's all that prep and smoke and fire over there, and it's quiet as, you know, birds chirping over here. You know, and they were as shocked as we were,
Right.
and it was really lucky it worked out that way, because we would have been slaughtered.
Oh, absolutely.
You know.
Yeah.
As soon as we did that, every platoon pushed out something called an LP, or listening post. And we would have 3 or 4 men about 50 meters out into the woods, into the jungle, around a tree or prominent, you know, piece of terrain. And they would be out there as an early warning, you know,
To give you guys notice.
to give us notice if they heard any enemy troops approaching.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not an enviable job to have,
Right.
to tell you the truth, because they can't dig, they can't smoke, they can't whisper even, but, you know, and there's just 3 or 4 of them out there on their own,
Mm-hmm.
50 meters away. Now a meter is
I was just
about
gonna ask that.
3 feet.
Okay. So they're a
it's
very good
100
distance.
Yeah, they really are. 150 feet or so
Mm-hmm.
out into the jungle by themselves.
Right.
And they can't see any further than about 3 feet, really.
Really.
Yeah.
And that is that because of the fog from the mountains?
Well, that's a good thing. There was a lot of fog in the Central Highlands.
Mm-hmm.
But the jungle was so thick.
Okay.
Jungle and woods combined is so thick that when you're laying down, you can only see about that far away. You know, you can't see any further than that because you're in a thicket
Right.
of woods.
Okay.
And so we couldn't see them, they couldn't see us, you know, and but we had to have that early warning safety set up,
Right.
rather than not having it out there and all of a sudden
You get ambushed.
being attacked.
Mm-hmm.
So we put a sergeant, I put a sergeant and 3 of his men out at a larger tree,
Mm-hmm.
you know, 50 meters out. So that's all that happened until midnight of the first day. Okay, we get there, you know, we kill the few Vietnamese that are the gun crews that are there. We capture these guns, and we go, fuck. what have we gotten ourselves into?
Right. Right.
And you know,
Absolutely.
and we know NVA regiments have sizes
Right.
of 1700.
And you guys were 280 at that time.
And we were 280 men.
Okay.
And by that time it was dark
Right.
because we didn't land till 3 in the afternoon.
Right.
Back in those days, choppers couldn't fly at dark.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have any night navigation
Mm-hmm.
at all. We couldn't bring in more companies, more men. I mean, we were stuck,
Right.
you know. Well, at midnight, 2400 hours, I got a radio call, a whispered radio call from the LP sergeant.
That you had sent out?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is your LP.
My LP
Okay.
sergeant. This is my area. This
Okay.
is the 3rd Platoon in shallow foxholes. We called them 2 by 2 by U. 2 feet deep, 2 feet wide, and as long as your body is.
Okay.
That's where the 2 by 2 by U. We couldn't dig foxholes because it was the water table
Right.
and the LZ was flooded. So you'd, dig that deep and all of a sudden you'd be in water.
Right.
So they were like that far under the ground. That's it. We piled logs up in front of positions and stones and fallen trees,
Mm-hmm.
but they weren't foxholes,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
We did the best we could.
Right.
And I get this whispered, panic call from the NCO out there. And I'll call him Smith.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll call him Smith. And he said, Lieutenant, I hear voices out there. We need to come in. Meaning, get the fuck back.
Right. Right.
We hear lots of voices out there, So I said, fine, come on in. And 3 men race through the jungle into our lines. Well, as soon as they passed me, and that's me right there with the circle, I grabbed the harness, the web gear of the sergeant, and I said, where's the 4th guy? And they said, oh, we left him out here. He was wounded. We took some fire and he was wounded and we think he's dead. And that infuriated me
Absolutely.
that they did that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this tradition that's drummed into the heads of every officer, every leader, that you take care of your people.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ways you take care of them is you never leave them behind.
Right.
Certainly never leave anyone alive behind.
Mm-hmm.
And you try not to leave dead bodies behind.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know exactly where this tree was. Only the LP sergeant knew. He picked it out. I couldn't see it.
Right.
And so I made him take me through this attacking line of North Vietnamese out to the listening post. And by that time, we had already begun to have waves of North Vietnamese attack us. They were already within a few feet of our positions, and they were shooting and all that. And I grabbed him in the darkness and told him, to take me to the LP.
Mm-hmm.
And we just somehow were able to run past these guys and they didn't notice us. I mean, it's pitch black.
Right.
They can't see any better than we can.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't fire our rifles, we just ran.
Mm-hmm.
And we got to the LP, we found the fourth guy who had been shot in the elbow.
That was it?
Yeah. And between the two of us, we dragged him running back into our lines. And I had our platoon sergeant hold fire until we got back in.
Mm-hmm.
You okay, babe?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just have to get moved.
Yeah, oh, I understand. So when we got back in, then we could open fire
Mhm.
and return fire.
Right.
But not until then.
Right.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
Would anybody like a cup of coffee or tea or something to drink?
I'd love a coffee.
Maybe just a glass of water.
You
That would
sure?
be awesome.
All
Mhm.
right, maybe a bottle.
Yeah.
Is that all right?
That's fine.
Okay, and coffee for you.
I'd love it, yeah. And it was so dark, you can't see. You cannot see that. I mean, it is an absolute absence of light.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing you can see are muzzle flashes from their automatic weapons. And then muzzle flashes,
This is cold, dear.
yeah, that's real.
For me?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Muzzle flashes from our weapons, just firing non-stop as fast as we can and throwing hand grenades. And the noise, well, you've been at a firing range,
Mhm.
that's just 5 or 6 guns
Mhm.
around you. Can you imagine what 40
Right.
automatic weapons on our end? And I don't know how many people were in this initial assault, but it was wave after wave after wave. You know, there'd be 20 or 30 attacking right here, and we would kill as many as we could,
Mm-hmm.
and then there'd be a pause, and there'd be another 20 or 30, 50 attacking again in back of them. And it's just nothing but bullets and tracers and fire. Let me go back and just say one more thing about this. This LP sergeant found me.
And this is the one that was shot in the elbow.
No,
No.
I'm sorry.
This is the one that you drove
That
back.
who left,
Okay. Okay.
who abandoned his man.
Mm-hmm.
This LP sergeant, about, I don't know, 8 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
got a hold of me. And he lives out in California. He retired from the Army. And he sent me an email asking me to put him up for a Bronze Star for him going out on the LP. And I wrote him back and I said, not only will I not do that,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't get medals for carrying out orders.
Right.
That was your job.
Right.
You know, you get medals for things that are extraordinary.
Right.
I'm not gonna put you up for a medal for doing your job, but in fact, you're lucky that I was wounded at 10 Alpha, and I spent several weeks in a hospital, because you should have been court-martialed.
Yeah.
For dereliction of duty, for
Mhm.
leaving that fourth man behind.
Absolutely.
That was cowardice, it
Mhm.
was dereliction of duty.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably a list of charges,
Right.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
that he committed.
Mm-hmm.
And I never heard from him again.
Well, it's the truth.
Never did.
Some people don't like the truth.
I couldn't believe that.
Hmm.
Well, all night, from midnight until dawn, 0600, it was an all-night battle. It just intensified. There'd be 50, 100, 50, 150 NVA attacking my platoon.
Mm-hmm.
And my platoon happened to be the one that they attacked because Chupong Mountain was right here. It wasn't over here
Right.
in Company B's side,
Right.
down here where the second platoon was.
And you're right in the middle, so if they can come in the middle, they can split you guys in
They
half.
just happened to be, I happened to have that sector,
Mm-hmm.
and the Chupong Mountain is right here, and the trails ran right down where the third platoon, you know, the third herd, we call ourselves, happened to be.
Lucky you.
I know it. And this is my 22nd day.
I was going to ask you about that because I knew from talking before that you had just started,
Yeah, 22 days
just
before
been
that.
over there, and you hadn't had a whole lot of experience.
Oh, no,
Yeah,
no. I just had great schooling,
right.
but that was the first time I heard a shot fired in anger.
And that
Yeah.
battle was?
Yeah,
Holy crap.
very first time. So we fought all night, and I would crawl, run, crouched, up and down the lines all night, checking in with each position. You know, we have 2 or 3 guys per, quote, fighting area.
Right.
I don't want to say foxhole because it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, I'll just say that. And we also had 4 machine guns. Now, an infantry platoon usually back then only had carried 2.
Mm-hmm.
These are the M60s machine guns.
Mm-hmm.
But I told, when we set this up and I saw where the Chupong Mountain was and the commo wire that led right up the mountain, I told my platoon sergeant to go over to the company CP on the other edge of the LZ,
Mm-hmm.
to go over there and borrow 2 of their M60s because they were in the middle of the LZ.
Right,
They didn't need it.
right,
Hell, you know, if they needed it, then, you know, they were dead anyway.
right.
I wanted more. So I got 2 more.
Thank God.
And we also had borrowed a starlight scope from the company headquarters. Do you know what that is?
No.
That was the first version of night vision equipment.
Okay.
You know, the things that everybody uses now
Yeah.
to see at night in the green.
Uh-huh.
Well, the first version of the starlight scope came in a suitcase about that big, that long, and about that high. And it was this massive thing that you had to hold with both hands. I mean, this was really primitive. And it was about that big around, but you could actually see in the dark.
Okay.
Wireless caller.
That might be me.
So
Calls from wireless caller.
there were times during the night
Uh-huh.
when I would kind of sit, crouch next to this machine gun position close to my platoon
Right.
headquarters, where I would have the starlight scope, and I would put an asbestos glove on so I could hold the hot barrel of the machine gun,
Okay.
and I could sweep it back and forth as I saw, you know, the
That's
North
awesome.
Vietnamese.
Right.
Because machine guns have an extra barrel because they would fire and get so hot
Mm-hmm.
they would burn out.
Mm-hmm.
And our machine guns were turning white hot. They were firing so much, you know. And of course, all these guys had M16s, and they're
Right.
firing them that much too. But it was really great to be able to grab that machine gun with a huge oven mitt,
Uh-huh.
you know, that barrel, and go like this. And oh, I see, you know, 10 guys in a big cluster over here, and I could just walk it back and forth,
That's awesome.
you know. And we called in a shitload of artillery all night. Couldn't have airstrikes
Right.
because even jet aircraft couldn't navigate well at night.
Really?
They just couldn't.
Okay.
Not yet. You know, they could fly from one airport to another,
Right.
but that's different than
Uh-huh.
dropping bombs
Right.
around a position. So we had a shitload of artillery that we were able to call in from 3 different fire bases. You know, 105s and 155s. And I would direct, you know, that artillery and tell them how close to bring it in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they would fire out here, be very conservative, and I'd say, you know, drop that 50, and then I'd say drop it another 50, just as close as we dared to
Right.
our lines. You know?
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then here's this PFC who was wounded in the elbow.
Uh-huh.
He had been treated by my medic.
Okay.
When I got down to this end, at one point, there was a guy named Roundtree.
Mm-hmm.
Mazda, thank you very much. He was a specialist for, and he had somehow, in this panic and crescendo of noise, you couldn't even hear each other. These guys couldn't hear each other speak. You'd have to stick your face in the other guy's ear and scream to hear over all this noise. He had lost his helmet somehow. I mean, it was around, but he lost it.
Mm-hmm.
And he was panicked, absolutely panicked, you know, because they were throwing hand grenades and rockets, and obviously bullets are flying around. And so I gave him my helmet. And I don't know if you've seen helmets before, or the weight of them, but I took my helmet off and gave it to him. Thank you. Yeah. And as soon as I did, it was like, oh God, thank you, sir, thank you, sir.
He's better.
He was okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, I asked the class when I give this, who's more valuable to the platoon? A bareheaded lieutenant who has no head protection? Or a guy who's a rifleman?
Is this a trick question?
Yeah, it's not a, well, it's kind of
There's a lot of different
I know.
angles you can take that as.
Yeah,
A, that's great leadership for you to do, and it's setting confidence and an example, but then, and it's calming him down, which is going to help that area down there. But then at the same time, you're at risk and you're in charge. So, I don't know.
There is no.
That's like the airplane one. The airplane one always has bothered me. If you're going down in a plane and you're with your child, you know, your instinct is supposed to, well, mine is that you give them the air, the mask.
The mask first.
But they
they don't.
say you're supposed to do it for you so that you can carry the baby or the child out and save the child, but I don't know. That's a tough one.
It is. There's no wrong, right answer to
Right.
that.
Oh, good.
You know, there just isn't.
Glad to hear that.
And that happened at about 2 in the morning.
Okay.
So now, from now on, you know.
You don't have a helmet.
Yeah, I just have a fatigue shirt.
Oh my gosh.
Okay?
Yeah.
So dawn comes and the firing peters down. That's the best way to describe it.
Okay.
It just peters down. It drops. And pretty soon it's fucking quiet. And all there is smoke from hundreds of artillery rounds in front of me. And we don't sustain a single casualty except for the guy who was out on the LZ, shot in the elbow.
Okay.
Well, about an hour after that, when you can see, at about 7 in the morning, my company commander, the captain, radios me and has me pick up my line and go out in line like this and count the bodies and pick up the weapons that they have, and then go out about 300 meters or so where a creek is, and then turn around and come back.
Because he wants to have a count.
Yeah, he wants to have a count. Wants
And
any
weapons.
Yeah, he doesn't want to leave the weapons there for the North Vietnamese to get the next night. You know, and that's just what we did. We counted the number of people killed. So we all get up, except for 1 or 2 people back here, and we start counting bodies, and that's what those red X's signify. That's how close they got,
Oh my
literally.
gosh. Right.
You know, like from here to Karen. And we kept in line. We kept the line kind of even, so one group didn't get in front of another and get accidentally shot.
Right.
Because you can't see from here to here. And we came across some empty North Vietnamese bunkers that, you know, they had pre-dug to, in preparation for their slaughter of an American,
Right.
you know, company landing in their LZ.
Wow.
But they were empty. Came across them, counted all these bodies, all the way out to the creek bed, where there was this big cluster of bodies like this. And in that cluster, and this was so far away from us that the only, you know, the NVA that were killed by artillery that just happened to catch them. This mass right there. And there must have been, you know, several rounds that just happened to catch them at the wrong right time, you know. And one of the bodies was moving, and he was still alive. And I asked our medic if he would make it if we brought him back to our lines, because that's what you do,
Right.
you know. And we could get intelligence out of him, you know. Ask him, you know, are you from the 66th or the 33rd Regiment? Because, you know,
Right.
we knew it was one of the two. And how many of you are there? And on and on and on. And he also had some intelligence with him. He had this hand-carved map case made out of bamboo
Oh my gosh.
that
Wow.
a North Vietnamese person had hand-carved, and he had maps and documents rolled up in it.
Oh my gosh.
Can you believe that?
That is amazing.
And that is the map case
Oh my gosh.
that I took off him at that Low Creek bed at LZ10 ALPHA.
Wow.
And he was a captain.
That is amazing.
Well, the medic said, no, he's not going to make it.
Mm-hmm.
Because his guts were hanging out, and he didn't have a leg, and he had shrapnel in his head and neck. So instead of telling one of my men to take care of him,
Mm-hmm.
I did it myself.
Mm-hmm.
I just stood over him and killed him
Mm-hmm.
because I couldn't leave somebody wounded like
Right.
that.
Mm-hmm.
And that always kind of bothered me years later.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't start bothering me till maybe 30 years ago. You know, and I thought, God, what did we think of enemies, Germans, North Vietnamese, shooting our wounded?
Mm-hmm.
We called that a war crime. You know?
If he wouldn't have made it, though, to me, that's the difference.
That's a mercy killing.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess,
It's my opinion. You're taking him out of the suffering.
yeah, that's after a lot of therapy and
Mhm.
stuff. That's kind of what I concluded. I
Mhm.
was doing him a favor. You know?
Mm-hmm. If he would have not been wounded, or if he would have been shot in the elbow, and you would have done that, I could see
been
why
a
you might
little
feel
different.
guilty.
Yeah.
But
The other reason I felt over the years, since then, 50 years ago,
Mhm.
is that it felt so good to do it.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I can understand that.
It
The
really-
adrenaline, the battle, they're trying to kill you and the people that you're with.
And I loved it.
Mm-hmm. That's why you think I work the job I work.
You know?
I love my job for the adrenaline rush.
So anyway,
Not the same thing, but
by
still.
this time, there's about 38 guys back here. Oh, and in the meantime, this PFC that was wounded in the elbow
Mm-hmm.
died. Out of shock.
Really?
Just, yeah,
Oh.
he lost blood. I guess he just died of shock back
Mhm.
here, back where the medic was.
Mm-hmm.
So we got 38 or 39 guys out here with me. And all of us are carrying 3 or 4 rifles,
Okay.
AK-47s.
Right.
You know, and I'm
And
carrying
that's what you
that
picked up from them?
from all these
Okay.
bodies. Yeah,
Mhm.
they all had AK-47s. And machine guns, you know, larger machine guns like our M60
Mhm.
machine guns, their version of it. And we're pretty burdened, you know. So we turn around and we come back like that. And there's been no fire at all, other than my rants. It's been quiet. Unknown to us, while we were out here, the NVA had snuck in from the sides like this and reoccupied these empty bunkers. And they brought with them 2 heavy machine guns, and that's a picture of the machine gun. It's so big that it has wheels.
I remember you showing me that picture.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and a shield, you know, and it takes like a 4-man crew. And 2 of those bunkers had that thing in there, and it was a Chinese communist SG-43. And we were coming back like this. We weren't tactically,
Right.
we were just returning to our LZ.
Mm-hmm.
We were done. It was over.
Right.
You know, it was quiet. We just swept this area,
Right.
you know, and it had a little delay out here. And I turned around and okay, and we just headed back.
Right.
Well, we headed back, and as soon as we got to here, the first warning was when this machine gun shot me in the head. And the first burst hit me because I was in front and hit my platoon sergeant and wounded him in the neck. And all hell broke out from the North Vietnamese that occupied these bunkers that we had just, you know, half hour earlier saw were empty.
Mm-hmm.
And we couldn't even see them. They were so well camouflaged. Right. And it just tore my platoon apart. You know, because here we are all carrying 2 or 3 rifles plus our own. And, you know, exhausted from fighting all day, all night, I mean. And we're just on the way back to our perimeter. Well, we fought them off from where we laid. And when I was,
It's coffee.
Yes. And when I was shot, it knocked me head over heels. It was like getting hit in the head with a iron baseball bat. And I almost landed on top of my platoon sergeant who was next to me, who was shot in the neck. And I just laid on top of him to protect him and watched the bullets just go up and down our bodies, you know.
Where did it hit you in the head? Right there?
Yeah, here, and it went back to here.
Wow.
And of course, I didn't have a helmet.
Right.
So, after about 45 minutes, an hour, it's hard for me to tell, honestly, because I couldn't see out of this eye, because I had a big flap of skin and blood coming down. The pressure eased because the first platoon, who occupied the sector right next to me, assaulted their flank, came from their line and assaulted them from behind and took the pressure off of us. And we were able to gather our wounded and the dead. And there were 5 killed right then and there. And I put their names here to honor them, you know.
Roundtree, that name sounds familiar. Did you say something about him earlier?
Yeah.
Was he the helmet? The one you gave the helmet to?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
From down in this position. Yeah.
Okay.
He had been killed.
Yeah.
So he didn't make it. And 2 sergeants and those were the ones killed immediately. these black X's.
Right.
And then many of everybody else, including me,
Mhm.
were wounded.
Right.
There was a lot of wounded.
Mhm.
10, 15, 20
Mhm.
wounded. You know. So the unwounded kind of helped us, including me,
Mhm.
you know, to make it back into here. Well, all of that day, day 2, we were attacked by even larger numbers of North Vietnamese. Again, coming down that mountain, Chupong Mountain. And at some point in the morning, there was like another pause, you know. The firing petered out. They, you know, it's like, are we done? Is that it? And they were able to get in one dust off.
What's a dust off?
A Huey
Okay.
air ambulance
Okay.
to get in one bird
Mhm.
up here in the northern part of the LZ.
Mhm.
And they put me on it
Mhm.
because I think my wound looked worse than it was,
Mhm.
but they put me on it. And just as we were with a bunch of other guys that were badly wounded, chest wounds, and just as the bird was about ready to take off, get what we call light on the skids,
Mhm.
just starting to hover an inch or so off, there was this outbreak again of firing, and another wave came in, and I jumped off the helicopter before it could take off, and I rejoined my platoon because that's what you do. I didn't think it was right.
Mhm.
I just didn't feel it was right to safely get out of there before, you know, it was over. And there was still a lot of fighting, and a lot of these guys are still wounded.
Mhm.
And there were only like 4 of us in the dust off.
Right.
So we spent all day calling in airstrikes because now it's daylight and you can get airstrikes.
Mhm.
And they were attacking us so heavily that we were in danger of being overrun.
Mhm.
Because by that time, the 3rd platoon had been almost decimated.
Mhm.
And they're hitting the weakest part of the line with their main force. And one of the company commanders over on the other side of the LZ called in a broken arrow radio call. And when that's called out on the radio,
Mhm.
it's a signal to all the aircraft that can hear that. It's like an SOS
Mhm.
going out to the Coast Guard. Anybody who hears this, SOS,
Mhm.
any vessel, this, when you call broken arrow, it meant that a U.S. unit is about to be overrun.
Mhm. Wow.
That's how serious it was.
Mhm.
And that meant that any aircraft in South Vietnam who heard that radio call
Mhm.
had to automatically divert from what they were doing
Mhm.
and head to LZ10 ALPHA
Okay. Good.
and support us.
Right.
So we had Navy aircraft that were flying off of carriers on the coast, you know, just off the coast. We had Marine aircraft, Air Force aircraft.
Mhm.
There were even some South Vietnamese prop airplanes. You know, we had Spooky, the gunship that fired the miniguns, come on station. We had non-stop, day-long artillery and airstrikes. And we were able to bring in air closer than we could bring in artillery, because I could get on the radio and have somebody pop smoke. You know, the pilot would say, you know, give me some smoke to show me where your line is. And I'd pop a violet smoke, and it'd say, I see violet. And I go, that's confirmed. And I said, can you give us, you know, the next set of bombs 100 feet or 50 meters, you know, in front of that smoke.
Right.
And he'd go, I'll try. And they would come in as slow as they needed to. And I remember once kind of laying somewhere around, I don't know, somewhere along the line, and asking a Phantom flight, that airplane you see up there, that guy, I think it was Marines, if they could drop bombs 50 feet closer. Just, can you please, they are right up to us. Can we drop those bombs just a little closer? And the guy said, will do. And he came in so slow that to do that, to drop accurately at such a finite distance, he had to come in so slow, he almost was at stall speed. And that's about 125 miles an hour for a Phantom. And he had put his landing gear down, his flaps down, you know, and the nose was like this. It was like he was landing on a carrier.
Right.
You know, and he was able to do that.
Wow.
And drop 500-pound bombs,
That is
meaning
amazing.
500 pounds of explosive, which was kind of a small bomb. You know, and the concussion of that, you could feel all the way over here. I mean, you could feel it for, you know, just the wave of it would suck the air out of you. And a lot of the NVA that it killed, you know, killed by shrapnel, the blast, and just the concussion would kill them. There'd be no mark on a body.
Right.
And it would just be the concussion turned their insides into jelly.
Wow.
That's how big they were. And just so, we spent all day doing that. And then around 15:30, 3:30 in the afternoon, I was kneeling against a tree here, down on this end of my line, and I was shot again. And this time I was shot in the side, and it knocked me over. And I think I was kneeling, firing from a kneeling position. I don't know why. Meanwhile, 2 gunships that were supporting this had been shot down, and they managed to crash land in the LZ right at the bottom of it.
Wow.
Which was good for
No
them.
kidding. Yeah.
Good for them. And then things started dying down. All the firing petered out. And after about 30 minutes after getting shot, it seemed like it was over again. And they were able to bring in several dust-offs, you know, because we had a lot of wounded by that time. And I was carried on to another dust-off then, because now I had been shot in the side and then in the head. And It looked like things were over. And they were. Well, there's this truism. It's called the 1,000-Year War truism, that whenever any military unit suffers 50% casualties, dead or wounded, a casualty is somebody is dead or someone wounded. So the total of those two is the number of casualties. That unit is considered ineffective. They can't function anymore, and they need to be withdrawn from the field. And that's been true back to the 100 Years' War in Europe and Napoleon's time. Every single conflict we've had. So, the final accounting for 10 Alpha, there were 1,700 NVA,
God.
280 Americans. We were outnumbered 6-1. We counted 367 bodies in front of the 3rd platoon. And to estimate how many they had wounded, which we don't know,
Right.
you know, there's a formula that people have used throughout the centuries. There's about 3 wounded for every person killed. And that's true regardless of what army it is. German, Russian, North Vietnamese, American. So you say, okay, 3 times this, and that's about the number wounded, probably. But it's an estimate. That means they suffered a total of 1,400 casualties, or an 86% casualty rate.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Can you believe that? And I read later some intelligence reports. That a couple of weeks after 10 Alpha, Special Forces teams and their mountain yard, scouts found caves in the Chupong area that had hundreds of body parts in them, and they weren't ours. Yeah, so that kind of confirms the number of wounded. There were a lot that didn't make it.
Right.
My platoon alone, just my 40 guys, we started out the day with 40. We were outnumbered 42-1. We had 6 killed, 23 wounded, and that's not an estimate.
Wow.
So we had a casualty rate in my platoon of 72%.
Right.
And at the end of the day, there were only 11 men left from the 3rd platoon in the field.
Is that, okay, in the field, not, okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's not counting all the wounded
Right.
that were being flown, like me, who were being flown to MASH hospitals.
Now,
and
did they
evacuated.
stay there?
Who?
They stayed, those 11, did they stay there, or did everybody evacuate?
No, they stayed there. They just folded them up into the 2nd platoon.
Okay.
Because, they were like a squad
Right, right.
left.
Man.
And none of them were NCOs or leaders. All the leaders had been either killed or wounded.
Now, weren't you, how was it, you said that, I think before, that you were like down as far as the ranks because you had just started, you were 22 days in, but then you were assuming leadership of like other areas also?
No, just the 3rd platoon.
Was that just the 3rd? Okay,
Yeah, because I was a 2nd lieutenant.
okay,
And I was replacing a platoon leader that had been wounded.
okay. That's right. That's what it was. Yeah.
I think he was recovering from a leg wound.
And where was he wounded? Like in a previous?
He was wounded in a previous
Okay.
firefight,
Okay.
a couple of months
So
ago.
22 days in, you assume leadership of this platoon.
Yeah, this happened on day
Wow.
22.
My gosh.
I landed in Vietnam on the 5th of May,
Mm-hmm.
and this happened on the 28th of May.
Oh my. Wow.
Trial by fire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there's some final things that happen. This is like at the end of a movie.
Mm-hmm.
So and so he lived till he was 80, and we left LZ10 ALPHA 2 days later,
Mm-hmm.
and we never even bothered to return.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody kept it. The regimental commander of the 66 was recalled, and he was relieved of his command. And the 66 didn't return to Vietnam for a year.
Wow.
And we found that out after the war was over, and some of our generals went back and visited with some of their generals. But it took them a year to reconstitute a
Right.
regiment. Kingston, who was the battalion commander,
Mm-hmm.
Barbara Bob was his nickname, he went on to create Delta Force, and he retired as a 4-star general.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And Vietnam veterans, and all of the studies done since that time, particularly one that was done in 1994, all had a sense of betrayal
Mm-hmm.
by their leaders. All suffer from a destruction of social trust.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't trust groups of people.
Mm-hmm.
And we all felt pain and rage
Mm-hmm.
at the waste of it all.
Mm-hmm.
We fought and died for
Right.
an LZ, and it's overgrown now. You can't even find it.
Mm-hmm.
Who cares?
Right.
So, then I asked the class, are there any courageous leadership lessons learned from this battle?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot. I don't even know where to start, honestly.
Years ago, we were at a reunion, and there's this guy named Rick Chunner who was, I guess, a private under you.
Yeah, he was a PFC.
And he pulled me aside. He said, "Karen, you probably don't know this, but your husband is a really true hero." He said the things that he did, and he kind of left it at that.
Mm-hmm.
But that was, years later.
Yeah.
And that's what he thought of you, honey.
It's hard for me to believe.
Not hard for me.
Tell me about the supplies that they gave you. Wasn't that a big issue for you guys also? They gave you wool blankets. You're in the jungle. Like, did they give you supplies that were adequate? Because that's something when I've done the Vietnam research, one of the biggest complaints that I've read.
Well, no, not in 1966.
Okay.
Because we had never fought in a jungle
Mm-hmm.
war before. We had fought in a mountainous war, Korea, and in Europe, but never in an Asian jungle.
Mm-hmm.
So we were sent over there in 65 and 66 with leather boots,
Mm-hmm.
starched fatigues,
Mm-hmm.
didn't have rain gear.
Right.
All we had were rubber ponchos and
Mhm.
stuff. So there was a lot of that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But as the war progressed, they replaced and learned that leather boots fall apart
Right.
in about 30 days.
Right.
They rot.
From the rot in the rain.
Yeah, because they're always soaked,
Mhm.
you know, and they learned how to improve equipment so that by the end of 1966, the equipment was a lot better.
Okay. Well, that's good.
Yeah.
That is good.
So that's when I hand out this courageous leadership card
Mhm.
to the class now. And I say, here are some, leadership lessons that are moral, not bravery. We're talking moral
Right.
leadership,
Mhm.
which we started first. And the number one is that you always take care of your people first,
Mhm.
and then the mission, and yourself last. That means that officers and sergeants even eat last. They go to bed last. They dig their own foxholes last.
Right.
And they try to serve and inspire their people, not manage them.
Mhm.
Where's number 2?
Oh, I didn't put it on because,
Hold on.
but
Number
it's
2 is know where they're going, why, and how they're getting there.
I-
Good catch.
I didn't have all 10
Oh, okay.
on here.
Oh,
I only
gotcha.
talk about 6.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
The third one is the search for ground truth. They acknowledge strengths and weaknesses. And then they do something about them. Leaders always take all the blame. They bear all the pain, all of it. And they give their people the credit for success. And the last 2 that I talk about is number 8, they're rule breakers. And an example of that is unauthorized borrowing of the 2 machine guns
Right.
from the mortar platoon
Right.
and the starlight scope.
Mhm. Right. Good examples.
And they're straight shooters. They're candid with people. And candor is honesty and openness and simplicity.
That's awesome.
That's it. I say thanks.
How do you get? What's the response you get? Like, is it good?
Yeah, the times that I've given this
Uh-huh.
to some people
I
have been
I would think they
really
should. Yeah.
pretty good. I mean, amazingly good for me.
Right.
To me, I think, come on.
Right. That's awesome.
Well, your chair may be comfortable, but ours aren't.
I know. Let's move to comfortable chairs. Is there any more coffee
I don't know.
or just a toozy?
I just made a 2.